Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive into this, and I don't know. I've got a few questions I've got jotted down, but and now also that I've now that I'm recording, I probably should have said this before I hit the record, but I'm planning on. I've got some older lectures on Simone de Beauvoir that have been up. They've been posted on YouTube for a long time. They're just recordings I did a while back, probably over almost 10 years ago, maybe like second or third year teaching. But they've been on YouTube for a while, and I'll probably post those on Moodle as well. And those are good kind of introductory lectures to her, I would say. But the questions I have that I had posted on the um, the announcements when I listed all these events, the questions that I had written down for today are: what is freedom? What is identity? What is authenticity? And then I put, like, maybe we can discuss social media, how that affects these issues. And then the last point, which actually is the first thing I maybe want to start with, even though it's the last on the list, is this phrase that she uses quite a bit, um, freedom and its gratuity, because I think, let me write that out: freedom and its gratuity. So this first reading is it's most of chapter 2 of her book, The Ethics of Ambiguity. And in it, I think the main thesis, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but I guess if I had to be hard pressed for a main point or main thesis, it is the gratuity aspect of freedom. So, and here's another thing too, I should have probably said before I hit record. I'll also maybe post a lecture video for Sartre, because if you understand Sartre, it helps to kind of understand her as well, because their philosophies are so interrelated. They were very close personally, and I think agreed quite a bit philosophically. In fact, this book, you could argue, is she's helping respond to some of Sartre's critics. But so in the first chapter, she kind of goes over the nature of freedom to begin with on a sort of individual level. But the second half of the phrase, the gratuity part, this is, I think, again, the key theme of chapter 2. Let me make a list of all the different characters that she covers here. There's the Subman, the serious man. After that, I think you go to the nihilist is the next on the list. What else? The adventurer. And then I think the last one is the passionate man, is the last of these. These are what she calls disingenuous attitudes that people will take in regards to their freedom. And a lot of them, they don't even recognize freedom at all, at least in the way that she understands it and Sartre and the existentialists understand it. But another large part of it is that they don't accept the gratuity part. And so that's, I think, the key here. She wants to show, I think, towards the end of the chapter, the way she articulates it is, I think, she says, no freedom can justify itself if it tries to limit itself to itself. It always has to appeal to the freedom of others. And so that's, again, the gratuity part. The word gratuity, I keep using it. What does that word mean? People hear the word gratuitous a bit, and that's not exactly the same thing. But what is a gratuity? Maybe you've waited tables before in your life. What does that term mean? What's a gratuity?
I would think it's something like above and beyond. You are. I don't know if it would be used in the term, but something that would reflect upon. Somebody's giving you something, and so you're going above and beyond to return that.
Right.
Like a monetary value, but here she's not.
Yeah.
Probably that
Yeah,
way.
I think in a way you're on the right track there. And it might even be more subtle than that, I think, and I'll try to give some examples to explain. But yeah, I mean, the term is used a lot in the food service industry. I know when I was a waiter, certain restaurants, if your table is a large group of people, like 8 or more, 6 or more, depends on the establishment what the rule is, but you get an automatic gratuity or an automatic grat, is what they'll call it. And so they'll add 10% to your bill for a tip. So it's basically another word for a tip. But it's a sort of, the more primitive or basic sort of original use of the word, it's more broad than that. It's a sort of gratitude. It's having a sort of gratitude for something that you owe somebody for. They've done services, and so you sort of owe them for this. And so this is, I think, also a part of existentialism that gets unfairly and unfortunately overlooked. I'm not a a die in the wool existentialist, but I do sympathize quite a bit with some of their arguments, a lot of them, and I think that sometimes they get mischaracterized. And part of the mischaracterization is that existentialists are all self-absorbed and it's all about the self and screw society, screw the world. I define myself however I want to, and you can go shove it, basically. But I think that's not quite fair, because for them, your identity is inextricably tied to other people. You really are nothing unless there are other people. This is a point I think she makes a lot better than Sartre. Sartre said in his one of his lectures that my freedom is tied to the other, and the more free they are, the more free I am. And he doesn't, I think, do a very good job of explaining this and why I want the other to be free. It seems like, given his philosophy, I shouldn't care about anybody's freedom. Like, I'm free to care about whatever I feel like caring about. But she makes a pretty good case, I think, for this. And I don't know, maybe she takes it a little bit too far, but she seems to think, and her and Sartre, I think, are on the same page here, that nothing would really matter to anybody if we were the only freedoms out there. If you were the only free individual, if you were the only being with consciousness that was able to have goals and values, if you were the only one, then you wouldn't really have goals or values. The only reason you have goals or values, or you can do anything with your freedom, is because there are other freedoms in the world. In a certain sense, she says, well, that's not completely right. Your freedom is, you're condemned to be free, to use Sartre's term, but that's a sort of abstract freedom. Everyone is, your freedom doesn't depend on others. You can sit here and think whatever you want and imagine whatever you want. That freedom is yours, and it doesn't depend on others. But when you get engaged in the world and you get engaged in society, then the other is indispensable. And a couple examples, like there's a great episode of the Twilight Zone, the old TV series, where the one of the characters is a very I guess you might call him a very misanthropic individual. He hates people. He goes to work on the first day of the episode opens up in the morning, and he heads to work, and there's traffic, and he's just grumbling and grumpy, and he gets to his crowded office. And it's the 1960s, so everyone's smoking cigarettes at their desk, and so he's coughing, and it's all smoky, and there's stacks of paperwork at his desk, and he's just so frustrated and stressed out, and he's very like hateful. And I forget, it's been a while since I watched this episode. I think he goes to like some magician's shop and reads a spell book or something, but he wishes that everyone would go away, and they do. And the next day he wakes up and he realizes that the spell or whatever, the wish, worked. And so he can hear the birds chirping, and it's nice and quiet. And so at first he's very happy. He's like, wow, it worked. And he's hopping and skipping and jumping to his office, and he gets there all early. There's no traffic. He's able to catch up on all his work. He even gets ahead of the next day's work, goes home, gets a good night's sleep. On the third day, though, by the time he gets to his office, he starts to question himself, like, why the hell am I even going to work? Why am I even doing anything? Like, I work at this insurance firm, and people that I'm making these claims for don't even exist anymore. And then he starts to kind of go crazy, and he starts to see himself, and he starts talking to himself. And I think this is a really good episode for the existentialist. I think Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir would have liked this, because it's interesting, because he does the same things. His actions are identical on day 1 and day 2. He goes through the same movements, but on day 1, he may be miserable, he may not be happy, but his actions have meaning. It makes sense. You're like, yeah, this is an unhappy man. He's got this job. He goes to work. On day 2, he does exactly the same actions. He walks to work. But there's no people there. And now his actions have become absurd. And it's sort of like, the viewer watches it like, why is he even going to work? And, usually if you watch the episode, you sort of clue in on this before even he does. So, the idea is that nothing would really matter or have value for me in any sense, if it couldn't be valuable potentially for others, is sort of their thesis. Maybe you've been bored one day and decided to watch a movie to kill some time. Let's just imagine that you do that and you watch a movie for the first time. You've never seen it. You're all by yourself, and this movie just blows you away. It's the most amazing film you've ever seen in your entire life. Well, what is your first urge once the movie's over? What do you want to do?
I'd imagine you'd want to share this great epiphany that
Right.
this movie do.
Right. You want to go talk with your friend or your mom or whoever, right? You want to talk to somebody about it. And her and Sartre seem to think that this is the case for all things that we value, that all things we value are only valuable because they're a part of this human world. And so it's not enough just to look at your own freedom and your own decisions and your own choices. You have to see how they interact and interface with others. And this is something that's quite key and important in forming our identities. So the problem with these, I guess, attitudes, as she calls them, is that none of them are really doing this. Either they're not being free at all. They're sort of like the Subman doesn't even recognize that there is a choice. Or someone like the adventurer might be completely aware that they have this freedom to sort of make their life whatever they want, make of their life whatever they want to, but they don't seem to care about others. They don't seem to see the value that other freedoms hold, and how they're so important to that. And in a way, let me get another slide here. There's one more thing before we go through these different attitudes that I want to address. This phrase that she uses as well, she says that freedom or humans or the for itself, this is kind of a jargon term for human consciousness, the for itself, we make ourselves into a lack of being, to make oneself a lack of being. That's a very odd phrase, but it's just the way that the existentialists like her and Sartre, they tend to describe what it is we do when we engage in a project, when we engage in a life project, when we decide, I want to become a teacher, or I want to become a lawyer, or I want to become a nurse, or whatever it is that the goal that we set for ourselves. All of these are described by her and Sartre as a sort of making an emptiness, or making yourself lack being. You lack, when you tell yourself, I want to become a doctor, lawyer, etc., you're telling yourself, I'm not that. I lack being that. And you're the one that made yourself. But there's a lot of other things you lack being. You lack being a hippopotamus. You lack being a supermodel. You lack being a dentist. You lack being a mailman. But you've decided that one lack, not being a doctor, not being whatever it is your goal is, that's the one that really drives you. It drives you to fill that lack. And for her, this is a good thing. This is what makes us human. This is what is uniquely human, this ability to make oneself a lack of being. This is what we do with our freedom. We set goals for ourselves, a checklist, if you will, of things that need to be done in order to fill that lack. But the problem with these what she calls disingenuous or inauthentic attitudes, a lot of them don't do this. I guess the Subman, the serious man, and maybe to a lesser extent the nihilist, do not make themselves into a lack of being, or at least in the proper sense of how she's putting it. The adventurer and the passionate man perhaps do this, but they don't acknowledge the role that others play in this. So I guess, well, if you have any questions, jump in. But I was just going to kind of go through each of these characters and give like a quick description and see if you have any questions or concerns, and then maybe we can get some discussion going based on that. But I'll pause for a second because I need some water, and maybe you had.
No, I'm with you. I'm listening.
Okay, so let me start with the Subman, because that's where she starts, and she uses the example of like childhood, I think, and maybe I should read the passage here. This is like the very beginning of the reading. She talks about Descartes. She says, what is it, man's unhappiness or something. Where is it at? Oh, I'm way back there. So let's see. Beginning of chapter 2. It's around page, where are we at? Yes, this is page 35 of the book. And this is where the reading starts that I gave you. So, man's unhappiness, says Descartes, is due to his having first been a child. And indeed, the unfortunate choices which most men make can only be explained by the fact that they've taken place on the basis of childhood. The child's situation is characterized by his finding himself cast into a universe which he has not helped establish, which has been fashioned without him, and which appears to him as an absolute to which he can only submit. And then, then she continues and she sort of talks about this experience that, we all have as an adolescent, as a child. We're fresh, we're green, we're new to the world, and our guides to the world are the elders, whoever our guardians may be, right? Mom and dad, our grandparents, whoever's raising us, right? And the world appears to us as something that's just given. She uses that word a lot, the given. But we have this freedom to transcend the given. The Subman, according to her, kind of maintains this sort of childlike attitude throughout their whole life. And she admits that this is a pretty rare, a rare character. I don't know. In fact, when you think about it from the outside, I don't know how one would distinguish the behavior of a Subman from a serious man. They're going to act about the same. I think the only difference is somewhat internal. I'm trying to think of an example. I know, I guess this is sort of a stupid example, but I remember one time I was walking into the sandwich shop that I used to go to when I lived in another part of the city, and it was right next to my house. So I'd eat there a lot. And I knew, so I started to get to know the people that work there. And they had, like, I don't know, just like Subway or like a lot of the sandwich shops, they had a system. There's a spot where you walk up, you tell them what kind of sandwich you want, they get it started, then you wait in line and you grab your chips and whatever else you're going to get, and then they make your sandwich as you're waiting, and then you get to the register and you check out. So it's kind of typical setup logistically. So I walk in there one night, and it's super late. It's like maybe like 9 o'clock, and they close at 10 or something, and there's only one guy in there, and I've never seen him before. He's a brand new guy. And so I walked up to the place where you do your order, and I order my sandwich. I think I was like, I just give me a meatball sub or whatever it was. And then I start to walk off, and this guy freaks the hell out because I stepped outside of the little partition on the floor that says order here or stand here. And he's like, oh, sir, hold on, come back here. You need to order here, And I'm like, I just did order. I want a meatball sandwich. So I stepped back into the little partition thing, and okay, I will have them. He's like, well, I know, but I want to know, what kind of bread do you want? Did you want lettuce and tomatoes on that? And I'm like, lettuce and tomatoes on meatball? No, just the meatball, just the cheese, like, whatever. The point is, though, I think this guy, he was a newbie, and he probably was trained earlier that day or something like that by the manual, and I just imagine the manager telling him, hey, when we get really slammed at lunch, you got to kind of be what's the word I'm looking for? A cattle driver, like people try to get out of line and it gets all confusing, and someone orders a sandwich and they jump ahead, and this guy has a turkey, but you don't remember. But I was the only one in there. There was no one else. So I think, again, some people are incapable of thinking on their own 2 feet outside of the textbook. And I think also too, and I don't know what was going on in this guy's head. Maybe his boss was a dickhead, and his boss watches him on the camera and would chastise him for, I knew people that worked at the downtown aquarium, and they had to recite a script to every customer, even if the customer was a regular. Oh, welcome to the downtown aquarium. We have 20 tanks and 200 sharks. And it's like, dude, they know this shit. They just want to order their sandwich. So I get it. So I don't know what's going on in his head, but to me, that was kind of Subman behavior. It's kind of like the guy at your job who asks you for, how do we do something? And you tell him, he's like, are you sure? Did the manager say that? It's like, as long as you're a manager and you're in charge, they never question authority. They never, they never think for themselves. And she almost makes it sound like they're not even aware that that's an option. They just are like completely absorbed in, I guess, the values that they were sort of taught as a kid, or that they sort of latched onto, or whatever. And they never ever really engage with their freedom whatsoever. And for her, this is a very rare type. But in societies where you have a group of people who are oppressed, they might be kept in this sort of attitude. And really, she doesn't blame them. This is maybe a bit of a kind of politically incorrect, or people might think of this as politically incorrect. She's not blaming oppressed people for being oppressed, but she uses the example, for instance, of the slave who, through their own experience, because they've been treated like a child, and because they live in a society where everybody else that is like them is treated like a child, and everyone that looks different from them is rich or successful, then they're sort of brainwashed, and they're not aware that there's another way of being, and they sort of accept their condition as just a natural condition. In fact, let me find the passage. This is, I think, a couple pages into it. She says on page 37, there are beings whose life slips by in an infantile world because, having been kept in a state of servitude and ignorance, they have no means of breaking the ceiling, which is stretched above their heads. Like the child, they can exercise their freedom, but only within the universe which has been set up before them, without them. This is the case, for example, of slaves who have not raised themselves to the consciousness of their slavery. The Southern planters were not altogether in the wrong, considering the Negroes who docilely submitted to their paternalism as grown-up children. To the extent that they respected the world of the whites, the situation of the Black slaves was exactly an infantile situation. This is also the situation of women in many civilizations. They can only submit to the laws, the gods, the customs, and the truths created by the males. Even today in Western countries, amongst women who have not had in their work an apprenticeship of freedom, there are still many who take shelter in the shadow of men. They adopt without any discussion the opinions and values recognized by their husband or their lover, and that allows them to develop childish qualities which are forbidden to adults because they're based on a feeling of irresponsibility. So yeah, there's a certain irresponsibility of the Subman, just like we don't blame the kid for if he's a child, they don't know any better. This is what they were taught. This is kind of how she sees the Subman. And I think some people might read it and say, oh, how condescending, she's this white savior. But I think she's pointing to just a reality. There were actually slaves who did believe this crap. They believed that, they believe that they were just naturally inferior. And so I think, if you live in a society where those are the only examples that you're given, what do you expect people to sort of to and even if you do know that that you're being oppressed, and even if you do know that there's a way to be free, or a better way, if you're one woman or one slave versus a whole society, there's not a whole lot you can do. And so I think she, on the next page, I don't know if I want to read this whole passage, but on the next page, she talks about, the Muslim woman and the harem and the slave of the 18th century. And she says, look, maybe these people, they are aware of their freedom, and they are aware that this is bullshit and that they have more dignity than the white man or whoever's oppressing them says. But what are they going to do? If you're a woman in the Taliban's Afghanistan, you want to walk down the street in a bikini, I mean, I'm sure that Simone de Beauvoir would be like, yeah, I'm all for that, but what are you going to accomplish? You're just going to get hurt. And so I think her point is sort of like, in the end, and we'll talk more about this the next meeting, because it's more relevant there when we're talking about oppression and what are the appropriate ways to combat it, and should we combat it? Do we have a moral obligation to combat it? but she seems to think, well, do your best, but be realistic, right? I mean, if you're a mosquito trying to fight a windshield, what can you do? But unfortunately, the Subman type is the type of character that's not even aware that there's another way. They just sort of accept things as they are, and they might even kind of get angry at you for not, for being so stupid. How could you not just follow the rules? It's just so simple. They tend to oversimplify things, but they're dangerous too. And she talks about how all these characters can be pretty dangerous because the Subman can be taken hold of and brainwashed and controlled by despotic rulers who give them this, tell them this really nice story and let them hear what they want to hear. But yeah, most of us are not going to maintain this attitude for our lives. She seems to think that the serious man is the one that is the most prevalent, that most of us sort of maintain the attitude of the serious man. And I kind of like the way she introduces the topic. She talks about, I think maybe this is just me because of my own personal experience, but she seems to be describing this point in our adolescence when we start to question the world, what she calls the serious world of our parents. That this term serious world is sort of a catch-all phrase for our worldview that's been constructed from our parents or whoever raised us, society. I think a lot of kids are raised by pop culture now. The television and the internet raises them, but whatever. They're given this story. This is what's good. This is what's bad. This is what you do. Well, that picture starts to crumble. Maybe for me, it was like, I guess, high school, middle school. I guess I was 13, 14. I started skipping class and, getting into trouble. And, I remember the first time I skipped school when I was a freshman in high school. All of my friends were pressuring me to do it. And I had such faith that in the system, not that I thought it was good, but that I thought that they were smart and they would catch me. And I was like, there's no way. And I thought, if I skip first period, a bunch of sirens are going to go off. Woo, 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 Mr. Ross is not in his seat, send out the dogs, But, my friend's like, no, man, we skipped school last week. And I was like, how'd you get away with it? I just forged a note. I just forged a note for my parents and they signed it. And I was like, all right, if you forge a note, I'll do it. And I did it. And I skipped school. And that was the beginning of the end for me. I went back the next day and I was all nervous. My PE teacher, my first period was PE. The coach comes out, Mr. Ross. And I was like, yes, coach. You were absent yesterday. You got a letter from your parents? I'm like, yes, coach. I'm like shaking, handing him this scribbled note. And he just doesn't even read it. He doesn't even read it. He just grabs it, just signs it. Oh, there you go. And I'm like, it was that easy? Holy shit. And then next year I'm in court for truancy, so but the point is, it's like, this sort of, I had such faith, the way she puts it, the adults appear like gods to the kid. They have all the answers. They know it all. But when you get to a certain age, you start to realize the adults make mistakes too. And the adults don't have all the answers. And my dad said something, but my principal said something else that contradicts that. So which of the two is right? And so we start to realize the imperfections of the people around us. We start to realize the human origin of these values. And also we're called upon to participate in this game of creating values. And this is where, I guess this is why adolescence is so frustrating. It's not just puberty and biological stuff. We're trying to sort of carve out a sense of identity. And a lot of us, what we'll do is we'll just go back to something, maybe we'll go back to the serious world of our parents. Yeah, and just sort of, something that's familiar or something else that is more comfortable, like me. Like I was teenager in the 90s. So, it was like I was Mr. Kurt Cobain wannabe, and I thought I was Mr. Rebel, but even as a rebel, I had certain rules to adhere to, because I couldn't be preppy. I couldn't dress in a polo shirt, or else I'd be like some little preppy kid, So, as rebellious and as unique as I thought I was, even, the group that I went to had their sort of form of seriousness. And so this is the problem that she points to the serious. It's not that they deny their freedom. They confront it. Unlike the serious man, they're aware. They get to that point in their life where like, oh crap, like, all this stuff like is kind of uncertain, and I've got to decide what I believe. But instead of really facing up to that freedom, they find a nice story to tell themselves. I love the metaphor she uses. She says the serious man is like the woman who writes a love letter to herself and forgets that she wrote the love letter. So that's what happens. The serious man tells themselves that this is what matters. They pick a narrative, a sort of a cultural narrative or political or religious narrative, some framework that's going to give their life direction and meaning, and tell them what's right and what's wrong, and give them a basis to judge others by. But they forget that they're the ones that decided that you chose that, and then they start acting like it's just true in itself. And this reminds me also, maybe I should go to the next slide to write this. This will come up again next meeting. She's very critical of the use of terms like useful. And this pops up a lot in her critique of the serious man, because for the serious man, whatever they think is useful is just useful, period. And she says the term useful doesn't have any absolute meaning in itself. It always requires a complement. It's like left, right, up, or down. It does, left of what, right of what? If you're asking for directions to get to Austin, and I tell you, oh, get on the highway and go left, and then go right, and then go left. Left where? Right where? Same thing with the word useful. Useful for who? Useful for what purpose? The serious man forgets that and acts like whatever is useful to him is just useful. And in fact, let me find, there's a great passage here where she kind of explains this. Let's see, page 49. She says, the serious man puts nothing into question. For the military man, the army is useful. For the colonial administrator, the highway. For the serious revolutionary, the revolution. So these are all forms of seriousness, right? The military man, the colonial administrator, the revolutionary. They've all decided this is what life's about, the revolution, organizing society, whatever it is. And these are all, the army, the highway, the revolution, these are all productions becoming inhuman idols, to which one will not hesitate to sacrifice man himself. Therefore, the serious man is dangerous. It is natural that he makes himself a tyrant. Dishonestly ignoring the subjectivity of his choice, he pretends that the unconditioned value of the object is being asserted through him. And by the same token, he ignores the value of the subjectivity and the freedom of others, to such an extent that sacrificing them to the thing, highway, revolution, etc., he persuades himself that what he sacrifices is nothing. I'm imagining when she's talking about the highway and the colonial administrator, I'm imagining some politician who has this dream highway. They just have to build it. But in order to build it, they've got to cut through this family farm, and they got to cut, this old vineyard, and they're destroying hundreds of years of culture and tradition but it's convenient, and this sort of attitude for her is dangerous, because the only reason we have any of these institutions is to help human beings. But these people elevate the thing above the humanity which is supposed to serve. The ideology is a tool that we're supposed to use, but we become enslaved to the ideology. It reminds me of a character from the Franz Kafka story, In the Penal Colony. This is a very, very violent, disturbing, dystopian story of this penal colony, right? This prison island where this inspector is going to visit because there's a torture device that is very controversial, and he has to go inspect it to see if it should be discontinued. Well, he meets this guy who is, I think he's called the warden. I think none of these guys have names. Or the warden, the inspector. It's very allegorical. But in the story, the machine that tortures these prisoners is like I said, it's very violent. It's like a sewing machine. They strap these guys into the machine, they tie them down, and these needles come down and spell out their crime on their chest, so that as they're dying, they see murderer, thief, whatever, right, as they're dying. And so it's very inhumane. But at the beginning of the story, the inspector, he first meets the warden, and you can tell that the warden is very proud of his prison. He's very proud of his torture machine, and he speaks of it in a very matter-of-fact way. And when he gets to the torture machine, and he has a prisoner there to demonstrate the machine in use, and there's a few problems with the machine. He's like, oh, well, that gear's a little faulty, but that's why you guys need to spend some more money here, because this is such important business. And the inspector is sitting there in disgust. He's watching all the blood fly, and the pain and the agony. And he's like, this is disgusting. And the inspector is, I guess, disgusted, but the warden has sort of lost, his, I guess, feeling for humanity. He just sees the efficiency of the machine. He just sees the efficiency of the system that he's bought into. But by the end of the story, I think the warden, the one who likes the torture device, he realizes that the inspector doesn't like it, and that he's going to go back to the mainland and tell the government to stop funding this thing. And then he starts going crazy. He realizes this, and he turns into, I guess, what Simone would call the passionate man, right? The serious man, they see whatever it is they take serious, they assume that everyone else is on the same page as them. And if they're not, they're freaking idiots. But the passionate man is sort of like, they have this passion that only they understand, that only they get. And the world is against them, and they're precious. And so I think at the end of the short story, the character goes from being the serious man, and he's trying to explain how wonderful the torture device is to the visitor. But at the end of the story, he's starting to say, you don't understand. I deal with these prisoners all day. They deserve what they get. You're just one of these city slickers who doesn't know how, what it's like to deal with real criminals. And so, he becomes the passionate man, right? Who he only understands. But I'm jumping ahead, but that's, again, kind of one of the most extreme examples. She mentions the military man. I guess that would be more common. What if you're born into a family of military veterans, and they all, patriotic, we fight for our country, that's what life is about, and that's their form of serious. What is the danger there? Like, not only can this be dangerous to others, as we see in like the crazy Kafka story, but it's also a danger to yourself, right? What happens if you put all your hopes into one form of freedom, one form of engaging in the world, becoming a military person or whatever? What happens when you do that, and then that possibility is cut off from you? Imagine, and I know people like this. I know that my friend's brother, he doesn't know his brother that well. They were raised by different parents. It's like his half brother, but his father, to me, did a horrible disservice to this kid. But the way he raised this kid was, he basically didn't teach him anything. He spent most of his time, because his father was like really into fixing cars, so he just wanted to fix these really expensive Italian race cars. And he kept, and people would criticize, like, aren't you gonna be a father? He's like, oh, well, when he turns 18, he'll join the military, and they'll teach him everything he needs to know about being a man. So when he turns 18, he'll just join the military. I don't have to be a father. The military will be the father. So, he neglects his son. His son turns 18. This is my friend's brother, goes to enlist. They tell him, your asthma is way too bad. There, you can't serve. You're not able to serve military. Sorry. He couldn't pass his physical, right? So, imagine that, right? This is somebody who's sort of like, their whole life story is, when I turn 18, join the military, everything's going to fall into place. Like, no plan B, no plan C. What do you mean plan B, plan C? This is what life's about. What do you think is going to happen to that kid?
Well, I think there's going to be a situation, right? He's been put in a box, and these are the four sides of your box, and he's not really going to have the tools to be able to open the box or like go to a different box, right?
Right.
These are the parameters of your life that have been set. And sometimes people can overcome that. Sometimes people can't. It's kind of like cultish behavior a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. In fact, I hesitate to use that word because it's so loaded, but I'm with you. I think in a way, at least in its most extreme forms, it's very cultish. It's just you become very dogmatic. This is the only way, and it sets you up for a pretty devastating situation. Like you said, if you put these barriers around your life, and then all of a sudden you're put in a position where there's no other way but beyond those barriers. How do you navigate? How do you navigate that territory that you didn't even know it existed? So this is what leads to nihilism, she thinks. This is, I guess, the natural transition. In fact, it seems like she describes a process by which all of these attitudes kind of develop into the other, right? So the subman, almost all of us are that way when we're kids because we don't know any better. We're not, clever enough. We're still figuring our way through the world. We don't know anything. We can't make our own map. We haven't even been taught how to read a map. So typically we get old enough and mature enough, we start questioning things and we start to come up with our own views of the world. And this is what leads to seriousness. But like you said, the danger there is kind of don't be a cult member, right? Yes, find meaning in your life. But if you take yourself so serious and you blind yourself to any other possibilities, that's not healthy either. Because what might happen is you might go enlist in the military and they tell you you can never serve. I'm sorry, you have a physical condition where you can't serve. And so now all your possibilities are cut off, and you want to you reject existence. The nihilist rejects existence. They know they're free. They know that it's up to them to make themselves into a lack of being, but they don't want that. They want to believe that love letter that they wrote themselves, but it's too late, right? They wrote that love letter, they realized they wrote it to themselves, and they can't unforget that. It's too late. So nihilism is just this sort of, I guess, giving up on trying to find value. And not in this essay, but in a later essay she wrote, she actually distinguishes between certain different forms of nihilism. And I guess might as well mention them here since we're on the topic. She talks about, what does she call it? The humorist is one of them, and then the cynic. So I would say this doesn't exhaust it. There's just sort of maybe, I guess, more like the pure nihilism, the kind of goth, like everything sucks, life sucks, y'all are stupid, why do you care about anything? That's sort of like your, generic nihilism. But what do you think? The humorist, the cynic, what is cynicism? What does it mean to be cynical? You know the meaning of that word?
Well, yeah, if you're a cynic, I think you're a little bit of a Debbie Downer, right?
Right.
You're always take the glass half empty approach.
And you're very pessimistic towards people, right? Anything they do is for bad reasons. And so you're just sort of like, you can't see the bright side of anybody's actions. And so, yeah, that's super nihilistic. And the humorist, I think this sounds like what's so bad about being a humorist and being funny all the time. But I suppose this is the person that doesn't take anything serious ever. And they're always making a joke out of everything. And that's really annoying. I don't know if you know people like that, but yeah, it's just very annoying. I think to a certain extent, what's his name? Do you know who Gilbert Gottfried is, the comedian? Yeah, I think he's like this. I've never, ever seen him on an interview be serious, ever. And it kind of gets annoying, sometimes it's dumb. I don't know why they put him on some shows. I saw him on Fox News one time, and they were trying to talk about the Iraq War or something on some political panel, and he was just being really crude. He's like, I don't know anything about Iraq, but I know about Iraq over there. It's like, dude, what the, I think he joked about 9/11 on the day after 9/11. He was making 9/11 jokes. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like, guy, come on, have a sense of decorum and but sort of just never taking anything serious. And that's sort of, I guess, a sort of nihilistic attitude, according to her. Kitty, what do you want? My cat's bugging me. You've got food, you got everything. She just wants to be spoiled. I think when she hears me talking, she thinks that I'm talking to somebody and I'm going to go outside and do something. So she gets all confused. But
hey,
yeah, go ahead.
Barking.
Yeah, at least she's not barking. Yeah, it's not quite as distracting as the bark. But the nihilist, she says, in a way, they're kind of it's impossible to be purely nihilistic because You know, in a way, it's like, well, they still are there. If they really hated everything, they would just off themselves, you know. So it's almost like there's really no pure nihilism. You know, if everything went away like they wanted it to, they'd have nothing to bitch about. It kind of reminds me of you know, like I said earlier, I used to work in food service as a waiter, and I remember, you know, at certain restaurants having regulars that would just be always complaining. You know, they'd always go in there, they'd always complain, they'd always bitch, and I'd just be thinking like, geez, you guys hate this place so much. How come you eat here 2 or 3 times a week? You know, I think some people just get off on complaining. You know, they just get off on, like you said, they're just Debbie Downers, and they like to, you know, pull everyone else down to where they're at. You know, and you know, eventually, you know, most people are going to get out of this haze, and this sort of turns us to the adventurer. She doesn't really have a explanation for where this attitude originates. She kind of speculates. She says something like, well, maybe this is the nihilist who realizes, look, I'm stuck here. I've got this freedom. I might as well do something with it, you know? And so let's just have some fun. And then they become the adventurer type. Or maybe it's just somebody who's naturally adventurous, somebody who had a very happy childhood. Like, you know, my parents were hippies and they like encouraged me to explore things, and they're very open-minded. And so maybe that's where this attitude comes from. And when you first start to read the description of this type of attitude, you start to think, well, this sounds good. Like, she seems to kind of like this attitude. Well, the problem is, though, is that the adventurer, this is where we get back to that part about the gratuity. The adventurer doesn't really give a toss and doesn't care about the freedom of others. They tend to see others as tools or objects just to be used, you know, for their own, you know, I guess, adventure, I suppose. And she uses the example of Cortez, the conquistador, and I think that's a great example. One of the things that the adventurer is delusional about is that they often think of themselves as these mavericks who are absolutely independent of the serious world. But she keeps emphasizing they are not independent of the serious world, or some form. Remember, that's sort of a, you know, that term means a lot of different things, but they're always tied to some form of seriousness. They have to at least pay lip service to some sort of framework that might not be completely up to them. Back to the example of Cortez. Yes, he was a conqueror. He was able to sail across the world and explore the quote unquote new world. And he was able to, you know, basically commit genocide or close to it on the Aztecs and all that. So he's this conqueror. And, you know, in his life, he was considered, I mean, I guess now he's got a pretty bad reputation. Historians look at him as this pretty evil guy that did all these violent things. But when he was alive, he was celebrated as this badass, you know, and he got fame and glory and fortune and all this stuff. But for him to say that he was absolutely independent and that he was just doing whatever the hell he felt like and without any restrictions, she would say that he's kidding himself, right? I mean, how did Cortez get all those ships? You know, did he just walk up to the king and queen of Spain and say, hey, I'm Cortez, I'm a badass, just give me some money and some ships because I want them? No. Like, what do you think what kind of stuff did he say, do you think, to get his way?
I don't think he said anything. He brought guns and people, and he said, you know, I mean, it's a power play.
Right, but he had to tell something to the king. He couldn't just say, hey, king, I don't care about you. I just care about myself, and I'm a selfish bastard who wants to get rich. So give me money and ships, please. No, he had to be like, he had to say, Your Royal Highness, Your Majesty, King and glory of Spain, I, Cortez, am a great conqueror, and I will bring Spain great glory and power, and I will bring you riches. Oh, and all you religious people, there's people over there that need to find Jesus, and I really care about Jesus. He might not have believed any of that shit he was saying. He might have been lying through his teeth just to get the stuff he wanted, but he still had to play that game. Right. And so the idea that the adventurer I just do whatever I want. Well, not really. You have to make some concessions to get your way. And you are, you do, there's a sort of manipulation. And there's another, I think, disingenuous thing about his attitude she points out is that when he's conquering, he justifies his conquering by saying, well, they're just savages, right? That's one way, like, I'm a civilized European and these people are just animals, right? Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't conquer something that's not another freedom. So in a certain sense, he can't call them non-people and then call himself a conqueror. You don't conquer things, you conquer men, you conquer civilization. And obviously, when he encountered the Aztecs for the first time, subjectively, obviously that's a different experience. Imagine you're on a trip with Cortez and you're one of his men and you're walking through the new world and there's all sorts of vegetation that you're going to see that's weird. You might see a tomato for the first time. They didn't have tomatoes in Europe before Columbus. You see a buffalo for the first time, and these are going to be weird, right? But you're not going to be thinking about conquering them or trying to convince them that you're God so you can get them to show you where the gold is at. This is what you do when you see another human being, another freedom, another being that's able to construct a serious world the way that you are. And so, like I said, Cortez kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too. I'm a conqueror, but yet they're nothing. It sort of reminds me of the Honeymooners. If you ever watched that old show when Jackie Gleason is saying, I'm the king and you're nothing. And she's like, oh yeah, king of nothing, big deal, right? It's sort of like, it's like, you kind of have to have me be worth something in order for you to be a badass to control me. And so there's this sort of tension there that the adventurer doesn't really face it up to. I forgot how she puts it, right? That this subjectivity can't justify itself if it doesn't wear its own face, right? That he's acting like you're a thing, but you're not a thing. I'm going to treat you like a thing, but I know you're not because I'm going to try to convince you that I'm a god and that I, all this sort of stuff. And so even if, this is an interesting line that she says, even if, let's say, Cortez becomes the dictator of the universe, even if he becomes the ruler of the universe, she says that even then, he still isn't completely detached from the serious world. Let me try to find, how does she put it here? He'll then know the complete servitude of tyranny, I think is the phrase that she uses. Yeah, he then knows, this is on page 62, he knows the supreme servitude of tyranny. And that seems kind of like, what? If you're a tyrant, how are you a servant? It seems like the tyrant, the ruler, gets whatever he wants. But in what way is a tyrant a supreme servant? What do you think she means by that? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, listening to you explain some of these, I think it's it's an interesting, there's a lot of power play.
Right.
And there's a lot of, kind of self-gratification.
Right.
I mean, you fall in these categories for like self-promotion, right? How can I view? Kind of like the example you gave of the sandwich guy. All of a sudden, he probably was a kid who's never had any kind of authority or power. And now he is making your sandwich and he's in charge, right? And so I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a philosopher, a German philosopher named Hegel, who talks about what's called the master-slave dialectic, and that's kind of what you're describing is sort of this power play. It's almost like what we call identity politics today. It's like you put somebody in a situation where they exert a certain amount of authority over you and they get a kick out of that, and it becomes almost like I hate to use the word fascist because I think that word is overused, but it's very authoritarian, I think, and like you said, it's a power play. But back to this point about the supreme servitude of tyranny, I think it kind of ties into that, is that even if you're a tyrant, let's say you're Saddam Hussein, right? I mean, in order for Saddam, well, he's dead now, but let's say you're, Saddam Hussein in 1992 or 91 or whatever, maybe even before that, before Kuwait and before the first Gulf War, you're this tyrant who has like pretty like absolute authority over the people of Iraq. You're ruling with an iron fist and with violence. Who the hell are you serving besides yourself? Well, could he be the dictator of Iraq single-handedly? Maybe you don't know the whole history, but what do you imagine that he just marched into Baghdad one day and said, "Hey, I heard you guys are looking for an evil, brutal dictator. I saw your ad on Craigslist, and here's my resume. Can I get an interview for brutal, evil dictator that wants to rule with an iron fist and murder half the people that disagree with me? Please hire me." "Oh, well, you're perfect, Saddam. Please come rule over us." Right? Like, how do people like that typically get in power?
I think there's probably a little more finessing. There's a little more caressing, right?
Right. There's at least some people that thought it was to their advantage to let him go ahead. They might have thought, yeah, he's a tyrant, he's evil, but he's my tyrant. He's on my side. He's gonna kill for me. Or maybe they believe that it's all lies. He didn't really kill people. He's really a good man. That's all fake news, or whatever it is. He's got to at least convince some people to help prop him up. It's got to be, unless you're like what's that guy from Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan. I don't know if you saw that movie or read the comic, probably not, but the character Dr. Manhattan, he's this blue, I guess he got his superpowers when he was in this experiment, and he can do anything. Like, he can manipulate matter and manipulate time, I think. So he can, if he wants to, he just thinks and you're dead. He just thinks and your whole body turns into atoms and disintegrates. But nobody is Dr. Manhattan, right? We're all people who kind of rely on other people. So even if we're the king, we have to have bodyguards. We have to have, advisors. We have to, no man is an island, to use the expression. So the adventurer has this sort of false independence that they see. It's not truly independence. They have to at least play some sort of games to get their way. So they're not really being completely authentic. And they also don't see that they owe the other for their freedom. They don't see the value of others, that even to be a conqueror, you have to conquer men. They're not just things.
Yeah, but I think manipulation is a great descriptive term for that, because probably the level of manipulation you have to weave to get to the place where you have the power to then set the rules, is really extensive.
So you're saying the term adventurer is kind of inappropriate for this attitude? Maybe conqueror would be better, or something like that, I guess. Yeah, because adventurer sounds too innocent for what we're describing here. It's like you're just a happy-go-lucky, want to have fun person, right? Yeah.
Adventure, it's a little more Dora the Explorer. I think a little more cynicism connected with the behavior.
I wonder if there's a similar problem in the French, though, because some words in French, I forgot. I was just like the other day, like the word liberty is there's no word for freedom in France. Liberty is liberty and freedom. There's just the same word. And I'm wondering if like that's a similar situation here, but I don't think so, because conquistador is a Spanish word, and French and Spanish are so related. I would think that the French would have a word for conquista, for conqueror as well. So I think maybe you're right. Like conquerors is probably, you're probably right. It's probably a better descriptor here, because what she's talking about is somebody who's like, yes, they want to have kicks and they want to have adventure, but I think the main point is control. It's sort of like, I have control, I'm independent, and I manipulate people to get this control. And so I think you got a pretty good point there. Maybe conqueror is a better way of labeling this attitude.
I think when you look at words like that, like the ultimate goal has to play in. So the ultimate goal isn't that they want to like drive a ship around the world, right? They want to be in charge of things, and they want to, own things and rule things, and, so I don't, yeah.
Or status too. They just have a big ego and they want people to like tell them how awesome they are, right? But there's some sort of power play going on there. Now that I think about it, though, maybe adventure is better, or it's appropriate, because I think the examples that we're giving and that she's giving, these are supposed to be like the most extreme. I guess, like, the conqueror would be the most extreme. But I suppose even if you're talking about somebody who is just a party animal, like they just want to have fun, right? They're not as, I guess, sinister as a Cortez type character, but at the same time, they're really in it for kicks. So as far as like what they're going to do in their life, they really value you as so far as your fun. If you're a party animal and that's your form of adventure, getting drunk all the time and partying, then you don't really care about people for their personality or their subjectivity or their value as a human. You just care about them insofar as they're amusing, and you might even manipulate them and lie to them, and do stuff like practical jokes and embarrass them just because it's fun or funny. So I think maybe, now I'm kind of like, maybe I'm like, maybe adventure is okay. It's just we have to keep in mind that we've got a spectrum here, right? Yeah, I think the adventurers maybe like maybe there's a better neutral term in the middle between adventurer and conqueror that's sort of more generic. But I think you're right. There's a sort of battle, I think, that's going on here. There's a sort of inherent conflict between this individual and everyone else, such that they have to manipulate things in a way that the world is the way they want it to be, whether that's just amusing or whether that's like controlling it politically or whatever. I guess there's, it's just a difference of extremes.
So I have another meeting to go to. I'm sorry.
All right. No big deal. In fact, I was just about to get to the passionate man, trying to run through things because I realized we're like running short on time. But thanks for showing up.
Sure.
I hope to see you maybe Sunday. I'm gonna go on and put that announcement up pretty soon. But if not, no big deal. You've been pretty valuable so far. So yeah, no biggie. I think I'm gonna go ahead and keep the meeting open, and I'm just gonna describe the passionate man and then close it or whatever, just to have that on this video for completion's sake. But did you have anything you want to ask me first before you log off?
No, just quickly. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see your video. Oh. Yeah.
Okay. I can't. It like changed it when you started to record, so I'm like, I don't know if I'm there or not. Hopefully,
it went on and off once or twice, but it's most of the time I've been able to see. So you're good.
And just if it works for you later in the day on Sunday, I usually have clients call from prison on Sunday, so later it works better for me.
It's gonna be unfortunately, it's I think I've already set it up for 2 to 4 p.m. Texas time, so that's, I guess, 12 to 2.
Oregon. I might be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Have you sent out the link yet? I didn't see it.
Not yet. No, I'm gonna try to do that like as soon as I'm done with this. I'm gonna try to remember, but I've got a bunch of other emails I've got to answer first. But it should be up there by this afternoon.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so I'm still recording. No one to talk to, but really quick before I close this video up, the passionate man, I'm going to try to keep this pretty quick. She says that it's the antithesis, I think, of the adventurer. I guess I could see that, but to me, I like to think of the passionate man as the serious man on steroids. The passionate man, they're the individual that finds this object, it could be a romantic relation, a person that they're in love with, but it could also be like the example I gave earlier from the Kafka story. It could be like a torture device, right? Like this machine that tortures prisoners. The point is that the individual has this relationship with this object, and I call the person an object because they're not really in love with the person. It's really the idea of the person, this ideal, the love, the relationship, and no one else understands it, right? That's the difference, I think, between the passionate and the serious, is that the serious, they assume that their values are everyone's values, or at least should be everyone's values, and are readily explainable and acceptable to your common average Joe. The passionate man almost has pride that only they understand what really matters, only they understand what's really going on. And so, again, the sort of fatal attraction, obsessive compulsive like relationship is a good extreme example. There might be more subtle examples of this, but this is a good example of the passionate man, right? The two lovers who, maybe one of them is abusive, but the other one just keeps clinging to that person because they love them, and all their friends are like, what are you doing with this guy? What are you doing with this woman? They're horrible. They're treating you like this, and their response is, you don't understand. You don't see us when we're alone, and this sort of thing. And the passionate man, very dangerous for the same reasons as the serious, because they put nothing into question. Them and their precious object is worth the killing everyone for, worth destroying the world for. There's a quote from Sartre where he says, in love, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. In love, 1 + 1 equals 1. I remember seeing that quote on Valentine's Day. I used to get a quote of the day on my internet, my homepage. And I kind of was upset because I was like, Sartre would not have liked that, because that quote is taken out of context. You hear it on Valentine's Day and it sounds very romantic. In love, 1 + 1 is not 2. In love, 1 + 1 is 1. We're one, we're united. No, but for him, that's horrible. That's awful. You are systematically denying your own freedom in order to present some sort of identity to the other. This is typically what we do, he argues, in these sort of obsessive romantic relationships, is that we have an image or an identity of ourselves that we want to project. We want to be good in the eyes of the lover. What we want them to like us, and so we act a certain way. We avoid mentioning subject matter that maybe we're interested in, we want to talk about, but we know they don't like it, so I'm not going to be interested in that anymore. We don't mention friends or hang out with certain friends that they don't like, and so we adapt our behavior. We sacrifice our choice and our free individuality to fit the mold that we think that they want us to fit. Or vice versa, we try to make them fit the mold. We try to force them into some sort of image we have. And if they step outside of that perfect ideal that we have of them, we get angry. We feel that we've been somehow lied to, or that we've been violated. That's not the Rose that I fell in love with. That's not the whatever. So we sort of we make them into an object, or we make ourselves into an object, and this is sort of way of systematically denying freedom. And there's a beautiful passage here where I guess I'll finish the video on this. For her, love is not possession. It's not owning something the way that the passionate man wants to own the thing they love and become one with it. No, it is to respect that thing in its separation, in its freedom, that freedom that is beyond you, the freedom that you can never touch, that thing that is so unique, that subjectivity that they have that is unique, that you become familiar with through its actions and through its engagement and its relations with you, and that you respect in its freedom. She says that this sort of generosity, this is on page 67, such generosity cannot be exercised on behalf of any object whatsoever. One cannot love a pure thing in its independence and separation, for the thing does not have a positive independence the way that human beings, free individuals, do. If a man prefers the land he's discovered to the possession of this land, a painting or a statue to their material presence, it is insofar as they appear to him as possibilities open to other men. We were talking about this earlier when Andrea was still here. The fact that things are valuable for me because they're possibly valuable for others. Passion is converted to freedom only if one destines his existence to other existence through the being, either thing or man, at which he aims, without hoping to entrap it in the destiny of the in itself, the objective world. So when we love something, we don't want to hide it and own it and cower and sort of hoard it to ourselves like the passionate man does. We want everyone to enjoy and respect that beauty that we love. We want to brag about it. Look at my girlfriend, and she's smart, and look at what she did with her, look at those paintings and all the art she does. And this is so, whatever it is that we admire in that one we love, it's not something, oh, no one gets it, only I get it. The world's out to get us, honey. Let's just, you and I be on this island together. That's not love, that's obsession. That's the need to possess, the need to control. but real love is the opposite, she says, of that. But anyways, that's I guess a good place to stop. I could probably ramble on for quite a while about Simone, but I should leave some more material. We're going to do another meeting in a few days, and so I'll post that as well, and we'll talk more about what one does to promote freedom and why one should promote freedom, and why you should care about oppression. So those are some topics that we will turn to in the next discussion.